We currently live in a world where Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake both exist and both are amazing games. Resident Evil 4 Remake might just be the best remake in gaming history, flat out. And that's quite an interesting title for Resident Evil 4 Remake to hold, because two of the other remakes in the Resident Evil series could have held this title too. Resident Evil 1 Remake is considered one of the best remakes of all time. Resident Evil 2 Remake is considered one of the best remakes of all time. Resident Evil 3 Remake, we don't talk about that one. However, especially on TikTok, something that I keep seeing all over the place is people arguing over which one is better, the original Resident Evil 4 experience or Resident Evil 4 Remake. And I'm here to tell you, it doesn't matter. You do not have to care either way, because the good thing is that both games exist, both games are amazing, and they're different enough that it warrants both of them still existing and being played today. I don't think I can count how many times in my life I've played through Resident Evil 4, the original one. And even though Resident Evil 4 Remake is out and it is brilliant, I'm still going to at some point play the original one again. Here's another thing for you. Resident Evil 4 VR is one of the best games I've played in a long time, and is incredibly different than the original release, even though it is the original release in VR form. And it is still yet another valid and an amazing way to play Resident Evil 4. We live in a world where there are so many different versions of Resident Evil 4, and all of them are excellent games, and I think we're incredibly lucky because of that. I think there is this weird stigma in gaming world where people like what they have, and if they haven't done something else, they don't like it. So for example, if we talk about TikTok again, the average age of a person on TikTok commenting on a gaming video is typically younger. So when I see people arguing about, oh, the original Resident Evil 4 isn't even good compared to the new one, I would bet nearly anything that they haven't actually played the original Resident Evil 4, and even if they were, it would be difficult for them to appreciate it for what it is based on the fact that it came out 18 years ago and they're so used to the way things that are modern feel now. Gaming and media and films and TV is all a little capsule of how things were at the time, and at the time Resident Evil 4 was amazing. It still is amazing, but it set the bar for games to come. We would not have games like The Last of Us. We would not have games like Dead Space. We would not have games like Gears of War. We would not have nearly any third-person shooter, over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, that you can think of if it wasn't for the original Resident Evil 4. Are there things that are better in the Resident Evil 4 remake versus the original one? Yes. Are there things that are better in the original Resident Evil 4 versus the remake? Also yes. The game is different enough from each other that they're both valid options even today. And this is something that I think the Resident Evil franchise is getting really good at. For example, despite its age, the original Resident Evil 2 is still a great game. It is a difficult one to play in modern day just because of how different it is and how it hasn't aged the best. But if you can get into the mindset of that is the sort of game that you're going to play, it is still a good game as it stands, and so is the remake, despite how drastically different those two are. And this does raise an interesting question. Resident Evil 5 Remake, Resident Evil 6 Remake, are they going to happen? When are they going to happen? Should they happen? Will Resident Evil Code Veronica get a remake first? I guess maybe we'll find out. But we are now getting into the territory of Resident Evil games that are not known to be as good. Resident Evil 5, for example, was considered the one that made things go a little bit downhill. In Resident Evil world, horror and action have always existed on a scale, right? And with Resident Evil 4, action definitely creeped ahead of horror a little bit, or a little bit more than in Resident Evil 1, but then even Resident Evil 2 compared to 1 had more action, and 3 compared to 2 even more so, and 4 compared to 3 even more. But then 5 took an even bigger jump where it went, okay, bye-bye horror, and jumps even higher up, and then 6 did the same thing again, and then 7 basically reset everything back. But with these remakes, especially with Resident Evil 4 Remake for example, I think they tried to focus a little bit more on the horror. I still wouldn't consider Resident Evil 4 Remake to be a scary game, but I think it balances the horror and action incredibly well, and if they are able to take that balance and put it in Resident Evil 5 or 6 Remake, should those games ever happen, I think we are onto a real winner. And it is rare these days for companies this big to go back and fix their older games, let alone acknowledge the fact that people didn't like them. And Capcom already did that, because think about it, we wouldn't have Resident Evil 7 in the way that Resident Evil 7 is if it wasn't for the backlash against 5 and 6 especially so. If you guys have ever played the Resident Evil games back to back, going straight from Resident Evil 6 to Resident Evil 7 is one of the most jarring experiences you could even imagine. I think the future is incredibly bright with horror remakes. We have the trifecta of horror remakes right now. We have Dead Space Remake, we have Resident Evil 4 Remake, and on the horizon, within a few months' time, we will have Silent Hill 2 Remake. And if Silent Hill 2 can be remade and be as good as the original, or be spoken in the same breath as the original, we are really onto a good year of horror remakes, and it's going to be very interesting come Game of the Year time. I'm not even sure if remakes are allowed to be in the discussion for Game of the Year. I don't have the answer to that one. But the fact that so many single player games are being remade and are better or good is a great thing, because we also live in a world where a lot of remakes and remasters that don't necessarily need to happen also keep happening. I don't know if you guys saw the news a while ago about Horizon Zero Dawn remastered or remade. Like, that is a game, for example, that just does not need touching. I would say there is no game on the PS4 that needs a remake. PS3, maybe. Some people would argue that it hasn't even been long enough between Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake, because the two games are pretty similar. It's not like Resident Evil 2 Remake to Resident Evil 2, and if you ever compared those games' footages side by side, you can immediately tell, oh yeah, that's quite different. So what do you guys think? Have you played both Resident Evil 4 versions, or all three if you count VR? I mean, I'm pretty sure at some point we're getting a Resident Evil 4 Remake VR, in which case that will mean we have 4 amazing versions of Resident Evil 4 to play. And something we've not even spoken about is Resident Evil 4 for the Wii, which is another different version. It's the original Resident Evil 4 but with motion controls, which means you can be even more accurate with your aiming, and that in and of itself is considered one of the best ways to play the game. Resident Evil 4 is a treat. We are so lucky in the gaming industry that Resident Evil 4 exists in so many different ways, and the fact that all of them are good. It's one of the most accessible games of all time, just down to the fact that Resident Evil 4, the original one, has been re-released and remastered that many times. I am pretty sure that I own Resident Evil 4 on the PlayStation 2, the Wii, the GameCube, the 360, the PS4, and now the PS5 with the remaster, or the remake even. It is a game that, it doesn't matter how much time goes by, the original Resident Evil 4 is still playable today. And if you have enjoyed playing Resident Evil 4 Remake, rather than being hostile towards the existence of the original one, rather than trying to decide which one's better or fighting that argument, be happy that both can exist on the same team, and that we live in a world where we have such good games to play, and that you can play them if you can just look over the fact that it is getting on a bit in age. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and go and watch some of my other videos. And I will see you in a bit.